In this video, I'm going to walk you through the process of creating quiz questions from inside of a quiz. Quiz questions can be created either from within a quiz or from within the question bank. Either one, there we go, question bank. Either one is fine. I'm using the process of taking an already created quiz and just adding questions directly to that. So as I've mentioned in other videos and trainings, when you create a quiz, there's two processes. First, creating the shell of the quiz itself, which are all the settings related to how the quiz will be implemented. And second, creating the quiz questions. That's why this quiz already exists, but at the moment it doesn't have any questions. I'll click Edit Quiz here, or Edit Quiz here, or in different themes this may be located in another place. Now, if I had questions, they'd be listed here, but instead I'm just going to come here to add a new question. If I had questions in the question bank or a random question, I would use those, but in this video we're focusing on new questions. I'm going to go over what most of these question types are, although not quite all of them. Some of them I will fully admit I have not used or have not fully wrapped my head around how they work, but can do so if that is something that, if you see something here that you want to learn more about. You've got your standard question types that everybody's familiar with. There's a multiple choice, a true-false. There is another kind of multiple choice down here called all or nothing multiple choice. The difference between this one and this one. This is when, let's say you've got 5 response options and you only want them to have credit if they have marked 2 of those. So which of the following things in this list are something, something, something? And they have to have marked all of them in order to get full credit for the question. You need to choose that one, because up here, even though you do have the option in this multiple choice question of saying that they can mark more than one thing, it divides the credit up among those options or gives them full credit for any one of those options. But there is no scenario that's all or nothing, which is why there's a new question type down here for all or nothing. True false is exactly what it sounds like. Short answer, this is an automatically graded question, which means you enter in the short answer and the students have to match it. There are some wild cards, or how close you want them to be to help take into account spelling differences, but generally this type of question is best when there is one correct answer, typically one word, and its spelling is important. A numerical question works just like short answer, except it only allows you to enter numbers. A calculated question uses mathematical functions, or functions that are actually more similar to what you might see in a spreadsheet software or even a programming language, to create equations that then have what are called wildcards, so randomized numbers in those equations, so that you can create a calculated question, duplicate it multiple times, and then students are solving the same problem over and over again, just with different numbers inside of it. The functions, the pre-existing functions, are appropriate for basic math and algebra. There are functions appropriate for trigonometry and lower level calculus, but generally speaking, I suspect that this question type is better for introductory math or algebra courses. An essay question is an open-ended question. It does not have to be used as an essay. You can expect answers as short or as long as you want here, and you do have some control over the size of the text box. While students can actually write as much as they want in this question type, the visible appearance before you have to scroll can be controlled in order to guide students towards shorter or longer answers as needed. Matching is what it sounds like. You have one set of things on one side, one set of things on the other. Students match. Random short answer matching. You've placed more options on one side than the other for some randomization. The embedded answers question is one in which you have a set of text with blanks, and students can choose from options to fill into those blanks. This is not what we call WYSIWYG editor, where like some of these others where you're just choosing from menu options. This involves using something called the closed markup language in order to prepare that question. It's essentially a kind of code that you import in. All or nothing multiple choice we've already mentioned. Calculated multi-choice works like the calculated, but there are more options when it comes to choosing what the answers are. And calculated simple is a single option. The difference here is that in calculated, they actually type in a number. In multi-choice and simple, they are choosing a number. Drag and drop into text. This works like the close does, but it does have an easier to use interface to create it. So you have a set of words and they drag words into areas on the text. Drag and drop onto markers. You have an image and you've placed some markers on that image and students drag names on top of those markers. Oh, no, I'm sorry, that's the image one right here. Drag and drop onto image. Drag and drop markers works kind of like a cross between the two, and I'm going to have to investigate that one a little further. Drag and drop matching is what it sounds like. It's a matching test where you move things around. All of these drag and drop questions rely upon the student's computer and browser to have a certain version of Java to function correctly. These are very interesting, fun question types, but I would urge you to create an example quiz first if you want to use these, and have your students figure out if their computer is capable of seeing. If they do not have the right version of Java or can't have the right version of Java, what they'll see is just a big gray box rather than the actual question. So this is really easy to check on your students with a little quick no-value quiz with a few of these question types. And then finally, select missing words. Again, works kind of like the embedded answers or the drag and drop into text. There are missing words inside of a line of text of some sort. And finally, we have description. This is a non-question, but allows you to put some text up. This is good if you have something like a passage of text or an image that then multiple questions will refer to. You can place that inside of the quiz. So those are all your question types, and I'm going to go through the settings for a couple of these before we wrap up for today. This video, it would be beyond the scope of this video to go through every single question and how it works. There are lots and lots of resources out on the web. This is an example where if you can find Moodle resources that deal with question types, it will work the same for our version of Moodle as other versions of Moodle. We're going to start with multiple choice, so it doesn't matter which question type you choose, you still check it, and then you click Add. And as you come around and pick things, you get some information. Not enough to actually tell you how to create it, but to just remind you of what the question type actually is. Click Add. So some question types have fairly complex settings associated with them. Some have really simple. The essay questions are really simple, for example. So first of all, because every time you create a question within a quiz, it goes into a question bank, there are some questions that are associated with that. Most of the time, by default, you'll just leave it in the thing that says the default category for this course site. And that is totally fine. If you're curious about how these categories inside question banks work, what all these things mean, watch the video on question banks. Now, because the questions go into a question bank where the question text itself is no longer going to be visible to you when you're selecting questions, just the question name, you need to name that question. How well you name this question depends on whether or not you're going to use the question bank. If you're never going to use question bank, then it really doesn't matter. You could number these. You could call them question 1. I often do, like if this were the first quiz 1, question 1, something like that. However, as I find myself heading in the direction of using the question bank more, I might want to make this a little bit more clear. Soch 208 underscore Q1, and then, quiz 1, question 1. So now when I go later to look at some of these things, now I'll still know, because instead of, this course is called Example Course 2020, but if this said Soch 208, then this category that this question Q1 lives inside of would be SOC 208, but I still find it useful to do this. And let's say that there's going to be some other information later that I might use. I can use what's called a tag or a descriptor field for that, but I don't need to worry about that right now. So now for my question text. What is the largest country in the world in 2020? So let's say this quiz is meant to just uncover some of their underlying current knowledge about population issues. Mark is the word used for points in the Moodle system. I'm going to leave that at 1 for right now. I can always change that later. General feedback. This would be some comment that you want to appear no matter how students do on this test, just general feedback. If this quiz were meant to be something that they use to help study, some sort of reference back to what materials this quiz covers that they might want to look at again, or things like that would be of use here. One or multiple answers. So in this particular question, do I want them to give only one answer or multiple answers? And I just mentioned this before in relation to how we deal with point values. In this, the regular multiple choice, I would have to distribute my point values among those multiple answers. I could not have a scenario in which they must answer all to get full credit. I would need to choose a different question type for that. I can choose whether or not the response options, the choices, are shuffled or not. And in this case, I'm going to leave them shuffled because that's useful. If you have a particular format that you prefer to have your response options put into, you can choose those. I don't care. The small letters is fine. All right, so let's start here. United States. I often do this in this order, where first I enter all the options, and once I've entered in all the options, then I come back and indicate what's correct and what isn't. So the way you indicate a correct answer in these Moodle quiz types where there's an automatic grading is that you say what proportion of the point value for this test will they get if they mark this one. So in this case, I'm going to say none. They get no credit because United States is not the correct answer. Russia, no credit. India, no credit. China, here they will get 100% of the points for this question if they marked China, and then none for Indonesia. And I can add more choices. If I did not have a 4th and 5th choice and just left these blank, then nothing would show up. It's not like there would be ABC with options next to them and then A, B, C, D, E, like a D and an E with nothing. Those just wouldn't show up at all. It would only be the 3 if I left these blank. If I need more, I can always add more. You'll notice there's a feedback option in here, and this is, again, if you want to use these as a formative assessment, as a way for students to learn through the process, then you could put some feedback here. Say, no, the United States is actually the 3rd largest country in the world, or actually 4th largest country in the world, and try again, or something like that. Yes, China at 1.2 billion is the largest country in the world in 2020. That's what the feedback is used for. And feedback can get really complex if you want to, because you have this full HTML editor here. Expand that. You can insert audio and video. You can insert anything you want, which is actually a good point about the question up here. Full HTML editor. You've got an equation editor, for good or bad. Different folks have different ideas about how effective that equation editor is, and it may or may not work for you. You've got some other formatting tools, video, an attachment, an image, whatever needs to go in there. All right, so now that I've set up my response options, I'm going to see, do I have any combined feedback? Maybe I don't want to put specific feedback on each option, but for any correct response, I want to, there's only one, so I'll say, woo, yes, China. But for incorrect, there's no partially correct, because I said they could only mark one here, but for incorrect, I could say, no, go back and double check our World in Data article number 1 that talks about growth in the 5 largest countries in the world, or something like that. Feedback is not something people have used very often in quizzes that are just meant as quick reading quizzes, quick ways for instructors to get a sense of who's understanding what, things like that. In an online or hybrid or blended environment in which you might be using quizzes to serve double duty as a learning opportunity as well as an assessment opportunity, if you are using quizzes as a way for self-testing or anything like that, the feedback becomes more important. So you might start to explore some of the feedback options here inside of the quizzes. All right, and do you want them to be able to, if you have set this quiz up to allow students to take it multiple times, and do you want, when you do that, and you can check it out other videos to see how to do that, but when you do that, you do have the option to set it up in what's called adaptive mode, and you can set it up so that there is some sort of a penalty for taking multiple times. You can have an across-the-board penalty for all questions if they take it a second time, or you can set each individual question to have a particular penalty. This is particularly useful if you've decided you want to use hints. So for this particular question, I could say, if you got it wrong the first time, I'm going to dock you 10%, and I'm going to give you a hint, and then I'm going to say, you know, if, and because I don't have this one set to actually allow adaptive, I'm surprised that it's letting me do this, but it's not letting me deal with the hint one options. So once I've seen the hint, do I clear out any incorrect responses, or do I show how many times I've gotten it correct? If I want a second hint, I can do that over again. So that's, again, if you're allowing them to take it multiple times and it's serving both as a grade and as a learning process, you might consider hints and penalties. You can have no penalty and still have hints, whatever you want to do with that. Finally, tags. These are of use if you are going to be using the question bank later. So in this case, if I don't have any tags set up already, I would need to create new tags inside the question bank itself, and then later when I'm making questions, I can pull from tags, and that will allow me to create new tags. All right, so now I'm just going to save my changes, and I've got my quiz question created. And now it's time for my next quiz question. Add a new question, and I am going to add an essay question. Again, same thing, categories, question names. Once you've come up with a method for naming your question, it makes sense to stick to it. That way it's always clear where a question comes from. All right, describe the fertility history of the largest country in the world. Not a great essay question. Please don't copy any of my questions. They're not all that great. But there's, there it is. And then I'm going to make that worth 9 points. And I could have some general feedback just like before. But because in this will have to be manually graded, it's just an essay, I don't have response options and response feedback and all those other kind of things. What I do want to say is, do I want them to have an HTML editor? Do I want students to have the ability to have all those editing tools that we have when we create the questions? Do I want them to be able to attach something? If so, I need to do HTML editor with file picker. Do I only want it to be plain text? That's important if you're having students enter, like this is a programming class, and you're having students enter code or something like that, because otherwise the HTML editor might try to pick up on that. All right, so I'm just going to leave it default. Require text. Require the student to enter text, or text input is optional. So if they were not going to be entering text and you wanted them to put an image up or something, then you could say text input is optional. And if you want them to be able to skip this question, you could say text input is optional. I'm going to leave this one at requiring them. Input box size. Now they can write more than this, but this is how they can, you can guide them as to how much length you're sort of expecting. So if this is really just meant to be a sentence or two, make it a short input box size. This input box size, this is maybe 10 right here, I think. That's a 10. So 5 would be half that. If you want them to really get to writing, go ahead and make it as big as it'll go. And again, as with any essay question, you're going to want to specify what your expectations are here. If you want them to just be able to post an attachment to this particular question, you can do that. If I had said yes here, so one attachment, I could say it's optional, and that might be for someone who is concerned about their internet connection and they're afraid if they spend 30 minutes typing an essay here, what if something happens and they lose all their essay? So instead they type the essay in Word, giving them the option of an attachment is there. And you can also say, you know what, I only want them to be able to give me a certain type here so that you don't end up with a bunch of junk. Unfortunately, yeah, there we go. So with document files, so sometimes I get these ODTs from students, which I can actually open, but it drives me crazy because it just drives me crazy. I could mark that off and say, nope, you cannot send me an open document text. I'm not really going to do that. It doesn't really drive me that crazy. But you can do that with attachments here in the quiz if you choose to. I'm actually going to say, nah, no attachments. All right, response template. This is a template for the students. So any text entered here will be displayed in the response input box when a new attempt at the question starts. So what that means is if you want them to write an essay, but maybe there's a certain format that you want it to be in, you can, like some subheadings or something, you can put those in. You could even use this in a lot of interesting ways. Perhaps what you're going to have are a couple of questions and you don't want this essay to just be all over the place. You want it to be pretty tight. So in addition to posting your question up in the question text area, you have something down here. So instead of my big broad question of describe the fertility history of the largest country in the world, I could instead come down here in the response template and say, what was the total fertility rate for China in 1980, 1990, 2000, 2010, and 2011. Please put a chart image here. And then below that, I can put describe the trajectory of the change in the total fertility rate. And then I could give a little space and then come down. So there are ways to use these response templates to tighten up what people are writing. And then if you have someone else doing your grading and you want an example or a correct answer or something like that, you can do that. Most people don't. Tags work just like the multiple choice question or anything else. So now I've got two. All right, I'm going to create one more question, add a new question. I'm just going to pick one of these. I'm going to pick the drag and drop into text. So again, I need a question name. Q1, Q3 this time, and then my question text. Apples are usually, but they can also be. All right, and that'll be worth 1 point. And then you have to use this little method. So I left it up here. I just left spots so that I could come down here and remember how this works. But actually, I'm just going to copy, come up here and paste. All right. Copy, come up here and paste. There. All right. Red, green. And then other things like combined feedback, multiple tries. Now, what's kind of fun is I'm recording this video. It's about training, all of this. I've never actually done this question type before, so but I believe this is how it actually works. Then I could shuffle these up and I'm going to save changes and see what happens. We'll see if it works. I can click on a question to get back into the editing for it. I don't need to save, so I'm just going to cancel. But there are other things here. This is the icon that tells me what kind of question it is. I can preview the question, I can throw away the question, I can change its point value. So point values are not the same as up here. This maximum grade's at 9 because I've already used this quiz before for other things. Normally that maximum grade sits at 10. And I'm actually going to change it to 11. Now, it doesn't have to match the total number of marks or total number of points here. You can treat these points more as weights. Like if I wanted this test to still be out of 10 points no matter what, all this is going to do is make it, because this adds up to 11, it's going to say this one's going to be a little bit under 1 point and this is going to be a little bit under 9 points so that it still adds up to 10. So this can be used not so much as an actual point value, but as a weight if you prefer, and then still setting your maximum grade to whatever you want. In general, for the purposes of clarity for students, it makes the most sense to have the point value because they can see that when they're taking the quiz add up to the maximum grade. You do have to click save after entering it. All right, so if I click the gear to get back into editing it, or I click on the question to get back into editing it, I'm going to preview this question. And there we go. Apples are usually red, but they can also be green. So that did, I did remember how that one, there we go. I did remember how that was supposed to be, how that was supposed to work. I'm going to close this preview, click it one more time so I can show you again. There we go. Apples are usually green, but they can also be red. In this case, I would not get credit for that point. That was just a preview, which is why that question popped up independently of the rest of the quiz. If I wanted to see all my questions in a row, I would need to come over here and click on the preview that's over here. So that is adding questions to a Moodle quiz. A couple of other points to make. Once students have taken a quiz, you cannot change questions. I believe you can change their point values, but you can't change the question itself. You'll get a warning about that. So make sure your quiz is what you want it to be. I can repaginate now. If I want to change their order, I can just click on these drag and drops. But if I want to repaginate so that maybe this appears on one page and then these two questions are on another page, I would need to click on repaginate. If I wanted to select multiple items to do something, most commonly to delete, I would do that. And then if I want to shuffle these, I can click that. All right, so this concludes the third video in my series on creating quizzes inside of Moodle.